we've been playing it for our kids for the last couple of years. Hello, hello, welcome everybody. Hope everyone is feeling relaxed and ready to move into a conversation with Kanyon today. So we're just gonna hang tight for the next couple of minutes. What I'll do too is, Melissa, can you tell me how to do the captioning real quick?
You need to hover your mouse around the toolbar below for Google Slides, and you should see the two C's for closed
I don't
caption.
see that. Do I have to present?
Oh, good. You're live on Anti-Racist San Jose right now. Yay. Do you have to present? You see, so you scrolled down. I noticed that I saw your control bar for a minute. So go ahead and scroll.
Yeah, I see it.
Click on that.
Yeah, I think you should.
Click on yellow. There you go.
Perfect. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and just play some music just to get us started, some alphabet rockers, and then we'll move into our conversation today, discussing local Indigenous protocol and building solidarity with Ohlone people.
Awesome, awesome.
Not very loud.
Sometimes you have to mess with how you're presenting the audio. I've not done it, but I know there's a strategic approach.
Like your mic maybe has to be all the way up.
Okay, so we'll give it just another minute and we'll go ahead and get started here. Hopefully everybody's able to see the captions. All right, everybody, so let's go ahead and get started here. So let's first start off by just announcing that it's National Native American Heritage Month. So today we're excited to talk with Kanyon and discuss local Indigenous protocol and solidarity with Ohlone people. Go ahead and just kind of go through the agenda here. So we're going to go ahead and just discuss group agreements. We'll do a land acknowledgement. We'll get into our group purpose and then move into our conversation with Kanyon. 1 second.
Darcy just arrived.
Oh, okay, Darcy just arrived. We'll just hang out then for a little bit.
Hi, Darcy, are you here?
Hi, I'm here.
Hey, Darcy. So I've gone ahead and provided the agenda. I'm going to go ahead and just admit a couple more folks, and then we can move on to just the welcome and agreements of if you wanted to go ahead and take care of these things here.
Great. Thank you so much, Dennis and Melissa, for hosting this again. My name is Darcy. I'm also one of the 10 moderators from Anti-Racist San Jose. And I'd like to welcome you all to this exciting discussion, very important discussion that we're going to have today. Just a reminder to please enter your name into the chat. So you should enter your name, enter your preferred pronouns, and also enter the Indigenous land that you're residing on. And if you have trouble finding that, you can go to native-land.ca and you can learn that. Also a reminder to please keep yourself on mute, and that our moderators reserve the chance to, or the right to mute you if needed, and also to engage through the chat. So we really encourage you to ask questions or begin dialogue within the chat, and to practice being in this safe space and in this brave space. This is a little bit of this is a land acknowledgement. So we start all of our anti-racist dialogues with this, anti-racist San Jose dialogues with this land acknowledgement. It's really important to recognize that we are all visitors on this land. So our anti-racist journey in San Jose begins with the acknowledgement that we as settlers are displanted people and we reside on the unceded sacred land of the Tamien people. We are aware that the US began with the conquest and genocide of indigenous people and grew its wealth from enslaved African forced labor. We offer land acknowledgement to the ancestors and descendants of this land, who are now members of the reorganized tribes and groups such as the Mutsun-Ohlone Confederated Villages of Lisan, this next one, Himmerin, Ohlone, Bay Miwok, Plains Miwok, Ama Mutsun tribal band, and the Indian Kanyon Nation. They inhabited and stewarded the unceded lands of the San Francisco Bay Area for thousands of years. And we have so much to learn from the indigenous people, including deep cultural and spiritual respect that they demonstrated for our natural world. May we learn to walk in a humble and honorable way by acknowledging indigenous knowledge systems that lead to more sustainable and relational futures. And of course, we believe that if we acknowledge these systems, that could also lead us to an anti-racist San Jose and an anti-racist Silicon Valley. The people of the land. Ohlone, as a term from the diverse people of the region encompassing the Bay Area and Monterey Bay, is a misnomer. Origin points to the village of San Mateo Coast. This is just some more history about the lands that we're on now. The region encompassed 50 villages and 8 native languages. Surviving centuries of persecution and genocide, many concealed identities and isolated themselves and continued to live in the Bay Area and Monterey Bay. Knowledge of cultural and spiritual traditions were forced into secrecy. The people of this land continue to form a diverse and vibrant constellation of tribes and families. People today carry forward and revitalize cultural practices and uphold responsibilities to protect and care for their ancestral lands. Ohlone people continue to be denied the right to exist as indigenous people, given benefits under the US law. So it's really important to recognize that our Native community, particularly Ohlone, are still here, right? They still reside here in this land. They are still here on their ancestral land. So often when we hear, yeah, like Victoria, when we hear about this, we often hear it in history books or in as if this were past tense. But I think it's important, we think it's important as Anti-Racist San Jose to acknowledge that we are still on this land and Native peoples also are still here. So decolonizing anti-racist culture and the European diaspora. Support Indigenous sovereignty and restorative justice. And Dennis, did you want me just to read through all of these or do you want me to, I'm just gonna read through all of them, is that okay?
Yeah, that's more than
perfect.
fine.
Okay.
Yeah, and just a really quick description of this. This was a vision that was co-created by Larwin and also Kanyon, and moving us beyond white supremacy and into a future that's all about decolonization.
Mm-hmm. And again, just kind of grounding and centering this in the work of being anti-racist, right? And recognizing that it's not enough just to declare yourself anti-racist, or it's not enough just to believe you're not racist. You have to actively do the work. And part of that is acknowledging these facts, right? Part of that is truth telling. And these 11 points here is a part of that truth telling. So support Indigenous sovereignty and restorative justice for Black, Brown, and Indigenous people. Examine whiteness as a myth that needs to be dismantled and decomposed. Moving away from the stream of capitalism. We are accomplices in ending racialized pressure of the police state. Embracing uncolonial ways of knowing. Letting our choices be driven by a desire to create and support a healthy life cycle. Choosing to recall and speak true histories. Using privilege to stay aware of what is ongoing in marginalized communities, being co-creators of visions coming out of these communities, holding ourselves and white people accountable. and there's no say that again, holding ourselves and white people accountable. That's, I think, holding ourselves, and particularly those who have gained from this colonialization, who have gained from racism, is important. We all have a right and responsibility to connect with the earth, recognizing my own personal responsibility. And that's a key point of Anti-Racist San Jose, as well as being a self-led space for understanding knowledge, is recognizing our own personal responsibilities to dismantling the systems that continue to oppress people of color, Black people, Indigenous people, Native people. Our group purpose. So group purpose, Anti-Racist San Jose works to put an end to systemic and institutional racism through self-led learning, healing, and community activation. And our group values. So our group values, number one is longevity. Actually, these aren't in any particular order, I don't think, but number one is longevity. This is hard, be a long distance runner. So being anti-racist is a lifelong commitment to learning how to unlearn the things that that we have been taught. It's impossible to live within this society and not to have internalized some racist ideas. So this is a long distance trek. Intention, identify what brings you into this space, solidarity versus sympathy. So often in our group, we see that come up, right? Sympathy, not really recognizing your own personal responsibility to it. This is us all showing up together and not othering in this space. Break open, be vulnerable. This is life-changing work. This should feel very uncomfortable if you're doing it right. This tension is healthy and it's what brings progress. So it's important that we allow ourselves to be vulnerable and to break open in these spaces. Empathy. This is the spirit of the practice of spirit of Ubuntu in Lakek and Kapwa. It's not sympathy, right? Empathy is much different than sympathy. And we recognize that at Anti-Racist San Jose. Restorative, practice being in correct relationship with others, be wary of righteousness, ground in humility and love. None of us are the experts on this. We all have something to learn. We're all growing, we're all evolving, we're all learning from each other. This is a space where we're learning in public, right? We're learning in community. And we have to address it with that type of humbleness that allows us to forgive others and forgive ourselves. Allow for breath, practice self-care, understand your boundaries, center, meditate, do it with your own community. Transform, move from racist to not wanting to be racist, to knowing when you are being racist, to doing anti-racist work, to moving yourselves toward abolition. This is just acknowledging that, again, this is a process, right? You don't go from holding and internalizing racist ideologies, a racist thought, to having racist actions, to all of a sudden being not racist or anti-racist because you just declare it so. There's stages of it, and we move back and forth between these stages, right? You could be practicing something one day that's anti-racist, and the next day you have a completely racist ideology or a thought. So this is transformative work. And envisioning a different future for all of us. We all have to have that hope. We all have to be courageous thinkers. And in this conversation today, that's part of envisioning what it can be by understanding what was before. And so the commitment to understanding the history of this valley, the commitment of honoring those who have paved the way, those who continue to be here, allows us to envision what can be in the future. And at Anti-Racist San Jose, we envision a more just, a more equitable, a more anti-racist place. And that really does depend on us understanding how we got to this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Darcy, for setting us up in that way, for creating the conditions for what we're about to experience. It is my pleasure to invite here with us, introduce Kanyon Sayers-Roods. Kanyon Coyote Woman, Hahashkani Sayers-Roods is a Mutsun-Ohlone and Chumash two-spirit Indigenous relative. She is proud of her heritage and her native name and is an active leader in the Native community. Kanyon is the co-founder and CEO of Kanyon Consulting LLC, where she strives to bridge the gap between Indigenous and contemporary value systems. Her goal is to make a difference in the lives of others by sharing her life experiences and knowledge about California Native Americans, focusing on global education with emphasis on promoting understanding of the relationship between humanity and the natural world. Born and raised in Indian Canyon, the only federally recognized Indian country along central coastal California by her mother, Anne Marie Sayers, Kanyon continues to be an ancestor in training by honoring the past to shape the future. As the opening speaker at events such as the Global Climate Action Summit and Americans for the Arts Annual Conference in San Francisco 2018, Kanyon reminds her audiences of the importance of acknowledging the spaces and places that we are on. Kanyon thrives as an artist, poet, author, activist, student, and teacher. Her art has been featured at the DeYoung Museum, the Somarts Gallery, Gathering Tribes, Snag Magazine, and numerous powwows and Indigenous gatherings. She's a recent graduate of the Art Institute of California, Sunnyvale, obtaining her associate and Bachelor of Science degrees in web design and interactive media. Kanyon holds culture, sensitivity, training, climate conversations, cultural burn, Indigenous land stewardship, and ecosystem restoration efforts. Dun, dun, dun. So I'd like to go ahead and welcome Kanyon to the stage, to the mic. Boop, boop, yay, virtual lands. It's so good to see you here.
Thank you.
So Kanyon and I are going to have a conversation that's going to be very free flow, very organic. I do have a list of questions, but those are just like reference points to move through as we have this conversation with Kanyon. We may or may not be able to have a Q&A section at the end. However, we would love for you to add your thoughts, add your questions into the chat box. Dennis, seen here in front of the city of San Jose in the sky, he will be monitoring the chat box and kind of filtering questions through. He might use a method called stacks in case there are a number of questions coming through the pipeline so that we can be sure to get through all of them. So Kanyon, you hooked us up with a really breathful bio that allowed us to see all the different ways you are bringing, I'm gonna call it power, magic, to this current day, to where we are in the world. Is there anything you wanted to share with us a little bit more about you, about yourself beyond what I read from our bio?
Mishmin Tuhis, good day. Conrakat Canyon, Coyote Woman. Well, I mentioned in the chat that I was in Acknowledgement Ohlone Territory, and now I'm in Tamien Ohlone Territory. I was just on a archaeological site. Well, I was just on a monitoring job, of which, per NAGPRA, Native American Graves and Repatriation Act, and CEQA, California Environmental Qualities Act regulation, there is rules around having Indigenous peoples considered when it comes to impacting cultural resources. The same way when project managers have to talk to a biologist to talk about the environmental impact report, both biological and cultural resources need to be assessed. And when there are job sites near archaeological sensitive areas, Native American monitors are called. And my mother, myself are Native American monitors. So I am in my work gear. I was in my hard hat and my vest, out in the elements, hanging out with construction workers all day today. And I am still suffering from a bulging disc from the beginning of quarantine. So I'm like aching and limping around. But however, I am well, able-bodied-ish, able-minded-ish, and wearing many hats. So my mind's like, what did I want to say? I am happy to be in this space. I am happy for the community who have taken time to listen and to join this conversation or opportunity of interaction. And I'm so glad to be in a space where community wants to take these steps. So I'm just happy to be here for right now.
Thank you so much. for lending that time. I mean, just straight up from work, you know? So
Mhm.
that this conversation that we have allows you some breath and doesn't feel like too much labor. Um, I appreciate the ways in which you're showing up and that you're being called, you know, with your own particular history and wealth and knowledge systems. What does it mean for us who are non-native, who don't have these knowledge systems, trying to do this anti-racist work? What does it mean to learn local indigenous protocol?
Well, no matter where we go, especially in what we call the United States, we are on stolen land. And I call it Western settler colonialism, or the Western settler mentality is very materialistic, capitalistic, resource extractive, both of natural resources and cultural resources and human bodies built on built and extracted from black and brown bodies to establish itself in dominance and power. When you win a war, when you win battles, the winner supposedly narrates history. So think about the Holocaust, and you hear the energy of the community honoring truth and history over there nowadays, where Holocaust deniers can actually face prison time, jail time. Yet, here in the Americas, the American Holocaust, the intentional disruption, the intentional eradication, the legalized genocide against indigenous peoples. Oh, we all make mistakes. Oh, it was of a time. Oh, it's we're no longer like that. Wait, then why is it that many of us who go to school are told in the third and fourth grade the mission curriculum, a one-sided narrative, and then in high school a little bit about history, but dominantly about white, patriarchal, supposed leaders? Yet even though there's amazing, innovative immigrants, innovative people who were disruptively brought here to the Americas, and strong warriors and community members who helped our society, helped our culture, helped our environments. We benefit from creations from many peoples of many nations. It's what makes America America. Yet we only prioritize white men of power. Interesting. When it comes to doing this work, we need to ground ourselves. First of all, whose land are you on? Indigenous peoples have been stewarding these lands since time immemorial. When we think about how old Homo sapiens sapien is, that's 200,000 years old. If I stretch my arms out, or if I was in a room with all of you, I would walk from one end to the other and say that's a timeline of humanity. And then I would come to about the wrist, edge of my wrist, all the way to my pinky and say that's about 50,000 years. Oh, wait, right at the fingertips, at the knuckles, right there. That's about 10,000 years. Wait, that's when a lot of people who study Western settler science that tries to prioritize tool making through archaeology, that all you guys, all you Native Americans or all you people come to the Americas over the Bering Strait. No. Indigenous peoples have their creation stories, which points out that they have always been from the land that they are on. They came from the earth, and we have our creation stories. There's a really popular creation stories, and it's in a drawer in every hotel around the United States. Oh, wait, that's a really cool creation story. It's one of many. So if I were in that room and I stretch that 10,000 year, so many people like to say, you guys came from over there. Where's the cultural humility? Where's the cultural sensitivity? And people, yeah, the land bridge, ice bridge, people went back and forth and back and forth. People married and connected. Of course, there's going to be different features. There's plenty of archaeological proof proving that there have always been indigenous peoples in the Americas. There's actually an archaeological site over 130,000 years old. There's tool markings on mammoth bones of humans. Interesting. And then all the way to the fingertip, the nail. I would say 1492. Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Who did he run into? What language did they speak? How far away were their neighbors? What was the name of their sacred waters? Their sacred mountains? It's been 530 years, and we can't even cite that or recite that without having to go to Google. But we can name all of the ships. We can name these men in charge. We could probably follow the records and find every family that was on that ship. What about the indigenous peoples? Columbus didn't even touch the American soil, the Americas that we know soil. And there's statues for him. All of these statues, they seem to prioritize a certain narrative. I've been accused of being a revisionist in wanting to remove some statues because of the imbalance of the information shared about these historical figures. Wait, wasn't the establishment and the creation of these a revisionist theory? So when it comes to that 1492 and all the way to the tip of the nail, we have 1600s, 1700s, the missions, wave of genocide against indigenous peoples, the intentional and unintentional warfare of germs, the intentional and unintentional assimilation, genocide of indigenous peoples forced to practice another religion, to be called primitive and dirty, yet native peoples were surviving and tending the land with fire ecology, and they were able to navigate around, they were able to engage respectfully with their neighbors. California has in excess of 200 language dialects. 200! That means different peoples, different creation stories, different governing structures. Interesting. And then the Mexican occupation, where I have my fellow relatives who identify as Chicano. They say, "We're in Mexico!" And I'm like, "What language are you speaking?" Spanish. Spanish comes from where? There's indigenous languages south of this border that we can be proud of. Colorism is a huge thing. And then the United States validated genocide against indigenous peoples, the legal eradication of indigenous peoples, $5 a head, 50 cents a scalp during the 1850s, probably 1852, 1853. Reimbursements to kill indigenous peoples. Legal. And the greed was so strong, the decision making was so primitive that the people who were just so focused on getting gold didn't consider that the mercury and the chemical output of blowing up mountains and destroying ecological systems would play a part in their own children not even being able to benefit from the water. So why are indigenous peoples called primitive? Why are we called savage? Why are we called dirty? Why in every history book are indigenous peoples called hunter-gatherer when we were the first ecologists, the first environmentalists, the first scientists, the first geologists, the first doctors? Tell me why the word shaman is widespread everywhere, but that's only one nation's word, and it's over by Tibet. It's over by Siberia. It's near the Ivank territory, by the Sakha people. That's their word. Why can't we call our people doctors, healers, suckers, to validate our own words? The Bay Area is a space where many people gravitate. It's kind of ironic that a lot of these shamanic circles got really popular in the 70s. Wait a second. In 1978, it was the first time that the Native American had the right to practice religion freely. In 1978, the Indian Freedom of Religion Act. That's 10 years older than me. So anyone who's part of this circle right here, right now, some of y'all are older than me, more than 10 years older than me. You were born before the Native American had the right to practice religion freely, legally. Oh, if you just follow the law, if you just don't break the law. It's illegal to be Native. Layer after layer, rules and regulation, systemic structures established. Even civility politics is a tactic to silence indigenous peoples. The concept of pure blood, the concept of how much blood quantum are you? How native are you? wait a second. My family and many indigenous peoples, we discouraged people to marry of our own clan. We don't want to marry cousins. This whole blue blood idea. So you marry outside of your clan to strengthen your bloodline. But wait, if you marry outside, that means you're less than. And if there's less percentage and less percentage, that means you don't exist. And if you don't exist, there aren't any agreements or contracts or treaties. Wait, there's 18 unratified treaties in California. Interesting. Federal recognition by the United States government. Why do sovereign nations, sovereign peoples have to work their tails off to prove who they are to a foreign governing structure that is on stolen land to validate who we are? Oh, because the economic disparities. Oh, because they took all the prime real estate and said, here, you can have what's left. It's frustrating. My mother was in a mini documentary called In the Land of My Ancestors. And I recognize my privilege. I recognize how lucky I am to have been raised on the land of my ancestors. I'm a very lucky California Native person able to say that. And that being said, I was raised in a both tribal or traditional and intertribal community where culture sharing was a norm, where respecting indigenous protocol was common sense and the foundation of many decisions. And what does that mean? Well, my mother is the caretaker of Indian Canyon. My family has always been there. We can carbon date a village site over 4,200 years at the mouth of part of the valley. But when people come and visit the land, when they want to have a space to participate in ceremony, before they go off and make a fire, before they go off and engage and assume, before they try and build something, they come humbly to the elders of the community, to the active voices of the community, offering gifts and coming in a humble fashion, seeking a consensual interaction, asking for a little bit of time, and then finding out, is it possible to even have a gathering, an opportunity to participate in ceremony, a space to be present at, a space to commune with nature. And then that consensual relationship grows. We've lost that here. So many people are so focused on what they believe they're entitled to. Ooh, I see this plot of land. I could see the potential. Ooh, I see all these resources. Oh, look at this. We can turn this into something. We can turn it into something profitable. Ooh, we can dam up this water. We need more water for our people. We're entitled to it. Do you know the history of the land that you're on? More than 50 years? More than 100 years? More than 250 when the Portola Trail came along? What about 500 years? Do you know the history, the ecological history, the geographical history about these spaces and places that we currently occupy, where we have settled upon, where we benefit day in and day out? Do we consider the institutions that profit and how they treat the original caretakers, the original stewards? As Indigenous peoples, peoples who are reconnecting to the land, we are your hosts. And you are guests. And it's important to consider, what does it mean to be a good guest? Would you walk into your best friend's house with muddy boots and just kick it and let it fly off onto the wall and get mud on the pictures? Would you defecate and then wipe your butt on their couch? Would you drive your car through their doorway? These are things that are happening day in and day out. Indigenous peoples are still healing and are still suffering and are constantly teaching about historical trauma, intergenerational trauma. And the fragility is so real that on the other side of the conversation, some people are like, well, if you just don't say it this way, or if you said it better that way, or do you identify as an Indigenous person? Do you identify as a Native person? What do you all like to be called? Where's the humility when we speak from as simple as, may I ask how you identify? Or like how we consider respecting people's gender pronouns. How are we talking about them and hearing about them when they're not in the room? Do you respect them enough to correct your friends about their pronoun? So who's talking about Indigenous peoples, and is there correct information being shared? That takes a lot of work. But the biggest thing of all of us call Earth home. We can say Mother Earth, Gaia, we can say all of these things. All of us have Indigenous lineages from the land of our ancestors. Some of us may be mixed, torn far away from our homelands. I honestly believe when non-Indigenous peoples gravitate to Native American and Indigenous ceremonies, it's their own ancestors calling them home. However, I recognize that some people who have that colonial mindset have been brought up in an environment that is divorced from its sense of accountability, any sense of humility. It's capitalistic, materialistic, engaged in a disposable society. So when people participate in ceremony, they go, "Oh, this is wonderful. This is awesome. I want more people to learn from this and benefit from this. Maybe I can I can't perfectly copy it, but I could take these cherry pick without being in right relation to some of the ceremonies and spirituality of it." And then they try and commodify it because they have to survive. So they can survive and help people, right? But that's when you get perverse creations, new age entitled energies of self-grandizing opportunities, and it's unhealthy. America is founded off of cherry picking. If you look up the Iroquois Confederation, our Constitution is based off of Indigenous practices. However, Indigenous practices that had matrilineal lines in charge to take away the power from those who were or weren't doing the right work. Oh, but wait, the founding fathers didn't want to add that. Oh, no. So just cherry picking without being in right relation. Lack of accountability. Many Indigenous cultures around the world have practices of humility and accountability. All of us need to take lives to sustain our own. Even if you're vegan, you have to take a life to sustain your own. How are we accounting for that? How are we considering how we're going forward with that? So it's all related. It is all related here. So yeah, I kind of went off on a little tangent there on one question, but I find it important to talk about it.
Dang, you took me to church and you got me like 3 degrees through that. That was amazing. Oh my God. I was over here just taking notes because I was like, oh my gosh, I'm taking this note that she's saying, and I could ask this question, and then you'd go to a new way, but then you close by saying it is all related. My biggest takeaway just from that incredible first talking point, I will tell you right now, I know no one else that can do what you just did. That's why I said you have magic. Um, the theme that kept coming up for me was, my question was, what does it mean to learn local Indigenous protocol? And I think through you speaking, the energy I actually heard was, let me back that up. What is your relationship right now to the history of the people of this land? What is your relationship to the land? What is your relationship to yourself and how you walk through the world? I mean, when you said even if you're vegan, you still have to take a life to live your life, it's the first time I ever heard that, especially because we live in a capitalist society that is forever forcing us to measure ourselves against one another, right? And we have felt some vegan culture, that feels very like I am better than. And so it reproduces that relation that again is not in right relation with each other, with the earth, with one another. So I love that you took us back to that you actually said, well, wait, what is your relationship to all of these things? Once you understand that, then maybe you can ask me about some Indigenous protocol, because what it sounds like is that that's where Indigenous protocol begins. The one word I also heard you mention over and over was humility. And what I loved is whenever you said the word humility, your voice like softened. You would take us through the history, and then you're like, and then there's humility, right? So when I think about us, non-native people, and I want to thank you actually for all of us. I'll speak for myself and maybe for the folks who have tuned in. When we know that you are speaking, or someone who is Indigenous, and we know that you're about to share some wisdom that we know we need to learn, that there is a certain calling for us to be here, because maybe, as you might have mentioned, our ancestors are calling us to this work, and that all of us have lineages that are Indigenous. What does it mean now at this point, as we have an understanding of sort of this long arc of history, especially when you put us to task and asked us, like, do you know the history of the land you're standing on, 50 years, 250? And I was like, no, gosh, right? But now here I am, I'm gonna go ahead and learn some more of that. What does it mean to build solidarity with the Ohlone people, especially for so many of us that are only now being able to recognize, like, Ohlone people are here. I don't know many of them, right? Like, how do we build solidarity with Ohlone people as non-native people? What does that look like?
Well, it could be multifaceted and multi-tiered. Because there's not many of us, taking steps to honoring truth and history wherever you are. So becoming familiar with the histories of the land, try and from as simple as going to nativelands.ca. However, even they let you know that they're learning too. There's no absolute borders and lines. In Ohlone, the term Ohlone is a misnomer. The word Costanoan is a bigger misnomer. Costanoan is what the Spaniards called us, Costaños, coastal Indians, Costaños, and Costanoan English evolution. And the word Ohlone comes from Ohlone. Ohlone is by San Gregorio, one location. And over time, as Native community members were in the missions, and Indigenous peoples who were called neophytes and Gentiles and Costaños and Costanoan and Native and savages, during the 1924 Indian Census, Special Indian Census, during the Special Indian Census, Indigenous community members brought back that term. It's our own word. Well, it's a little off because Ohlone is Oljon, and Ohlone is more Western Americentric. There's also a historical timeline where non-Indigenous peoples wrote archival materials, historical documents that were then cited and validated as citations. More non-Indigenous people citing other non-Indigenous sites. There were people studying Native peoples, and then that was cited by cited by cited, and over the evolution of the term through the 1800s, through the 1900s into the 2000s, and I identify as a proud Ohlone person. However, I do recognize that my own ancestors that have always been from my homeland in Indian Canyon wouldn't know that term, because there are 8 language dialects in what is considered Ohlone territory, and my community is in the Mutsun language dialect. And in the word in the Mutsun language, Ama is people. That's why there's a tribal band called the Ama Mutsun, the Mutsun people. However, thanks to 21st century settler colonialism and branding, if I passed away and I wanted to speak to my ancestors, I would say I'm Ama Mutsun. But wait, I am not an enrolled tribal member as an Ama Mutsun individual. Interesting. But there are 8 language dialects. And then there are many groups that are very active in their community. In the East Bay, there are 3 active groups: the Muwekma, the Confederated Villages of Lashawn, and Himrin. In San Francisco, in the Ramaytush-speaking territory, there's the Association of Ramaytush Ohlone Peoples. There are 2 descendants that are quite active in the Bay Area, and even in the south town towards Santa Barbara, because one of those individuals has both Chumash and Ramaytush roots. And the other one is Rumsian, Salinian, and Ramaytush. and Rumsian is down by Monterey Bay. That being said, steps, honest, baby steps. Honor truth and history. Try and learn about the Native peoples of the land. Reach out and learn about Native-led efforts. Consider, what does it mean to benefit off of the land? Are we caring about our decisions? Our actions and our words have an impact. And some of us are in the position of making decisions. Are you considering the next 7 generations? Because we can make decisions that help myself. We can make decisions that can help us as community, that can help our environment, maybe. That can help maybe a couple generations, like our grandkids, because we possibly want to have a legacy. But are our decisions caring about 7 generations in the future? Are we considering, what does it mean to be a good ancestor in training? What does it mean to have that kind of legacy that recognizes the rights of nature? So there is not one way. It's supporting Indigenous-led movements. It's learning about the history of the land that you're on. It's caring about how the land that you're on is being tended for and taken care of. Thinking about the ecological system. Thinking about our watersheds. Many of us get so focused on this global idea or this, United States or this West Coast idea. Focus on your bioregion. Focus in your little ecological system, because we can try and make decisions for globes. But if you don't even care about your own watershed, yeah. So slow steps. I have a book list. I have a book recommendation list that's always growing. And I'm trying to find a way to offer commentary on it, because there are some California natives who recommend the book The Ohlone Way. I offer you this disclaimer. The Ohlone Way was published in 1978. Wait, wasn't that the year that the Native Americans had the right to practice religion freely? Wasn't that the year that not many people knew that California Native peoples existed? So there was a community member who wrote the book. And my mother recalls speaking to another community member of the Bay Area. And the other community member said, I think he's cooking in the wrong kitchen. And my mom gave a comment back of a notion of, at least there's somebody in the kitchen, or we need a cook in there to voice, because that book was written with the perspective of respecting and recognizing the Indigenous peoples. The issue was that person didn't really talk to a lot of California natives, because a lot of California natives were not thought to exist because it was illegal to be them. Many California natives kept the sacred secret, kept it safe. Greg Castro says that his father said, be proud of who you are. And using traditional words, you are this, but don't tell anybody. Charlene Sewell used that phrase, keeping the sacred secret. Other elders have used that. And so it's keeping it secret for many reasons, both for historical trauma, intergenerational trauma, protection, safety, judgment, or fear, or respect. Many of these are true. And so doesn't mean we didn't exist. And I get so frustrated when I love and I get mad at when I see that people are like, oh yeah, we're doing Native American Heritage Month. Can you come and do a song and dance routine? You have a beautiful voice, and can you come in your traditional garb and tell the kids stories? And I'm sitting here I love to engage the community and the kids. I love to teach truth and history. However, if you're just wanting me to offer a piece, nah, I gotta come to a classroom and talk to 3rd graders about genocide, and I make it fun. Because I use empathy, and I make animal sounds, and I entertain. I'm an edutainer at times. But with that, honoring truth and history is considering the layers of why things are the way they are, and how could we be more or reasonably culturally sensitive. And many of us, people of color, people who are taking steps to decolonize even in their own European ancestry. I used to say, white people this and white people that. And I would then say the disclaimer, I am not talking about pigmentation of skin. I'm talking mentality. Because white people is not a culture. Actually, it is. It's a culture of Western settler colonialism. It's entitled, it's affluent, it divorces mindset of the sacred, it is resource extractive. It is engaged in a disposable society. It prioritizes the economy, the supposed economy, and the supposed capitalistic gain. It is negligent of the sacred. And so I would say white people, not pigmentation, because there are people who could be proud of their ancestors, proud German community members, proud French. There are many communities that are taking steps to decolonize. I know some people who are revitalizing the Gaelic words. I know a few Vikings. I know a few pagans who are like, I don't know a lot, but I'm connecting to these practices, these earth-based spiritual practices, because all of our ancestors came from that. All of our ancestors. And it's at what step that we want to continue our effort of reconnection to it. I recognize that white people or settlers of other nations, their community was also colonized by other nations. Their communities were impacted and they were ripped away from the earth-based spiritual practices. The whole witch concept. Those were just spiritual practitioners who understood plants, holistic healers with alternative methodologies of helping people. Women that were in charge. So every nation is different. Every community is different. Native peoples do not have to talk to or listen to you. They don't have to open their arms and invite you in. They don't have to like you. They have the right to not engage. However, many California natives that I know are willing to have conversations and willing to share educational resources. So not coming to an interaction expecting anything, but taking our steps to decolonize. In what ways are we learning about our bioregion? In what ways are we learning about the history of the land we're on? And are we supporting Indigenous-led systems? Are we considering giving land back to the original stewards? Because when Native people reconnect to land, I'm blessed, I'm privileged. I was raised, my umbilical cord is buried in Indian Canyon. My mother's umbilical cord is buried in Indian Canyon. I am quite rooted. I cannot come to the conversation from a place of disconnect. I'm a wanderer and I am visiting other places that are not my own homeland. And I attempt to walk humbly. I attempt to learn. I'm getting better each day. I stumble. I can't name all the native lands. Nobody gave me the ultimate download. I have to work too. Like, just because I'm native doesn't mean I was given all these beautiful gifts. I had to develop them and hone these skills and get better at speaking and learn how civility politics is a tactic to silence passionate voices. Interesting. And so I'm learning too. And I recognize I'm really lucky to be very grounded and rooted on the land of my ancestors. And my heart hurts when I see people who are disconnected, who might be confused about where they fit. It's like we all fit together. We're in community together. How are we in community together? And how are we caring about each other? We don't have to love and hug everybody. We can hold people accountable. We could be assertive. We could be demonstrative. I discourage performative when it comes to integral acts. I don't like performative acts, like a lot of these trends that are happening with the internet. The internet's new to us. We need to remember that. We need to remember our connection. We need to make decisions. We shouldn't be here when we make deep decisions. We need to be here. We need to be in our heart and get out of our head. And that takes a lot of work, a lot of introspective work, a lot of grounding. So there is no to-do list. There is no check item list. There is no easy commodified 10 steps to do this. There are Indigenous communities who happen to be creating some of those because they recognize some people might need them. So yes, there are lists that Native peoples have made. And if the Native peoples of the land have made those lists, I'd recommend listening to them. And you can learn from guidance from other areas. Hashtag land back. Just look, hashtag land back. Look at land back. Or look at land acknowledgments all over the internet. And it's beautiful, like every class. I love these youngsters who are like, we're on stolen land. And a lot of people are like, we don't need to tell the kids that. That's a little adult. It's like, when is the best time to talk about it? I remember seeing something on Facebook, and someone said, when is the best time to talk about racism to young kids? And all the people of color, well, one amazing member of the community said, must be nice. Really lucky to consider when is the best time to think about that, because we're impacted by it. We're impacted day in and day out. So yeah, I hope that makes sense.
Makes sense. I'll be truthful. Like I'm really looking at this side Google Doc, and it has like 15 questions, and you answer all of them in like one fell swoop. So I'm gonna go to the one that I feel like what happens in anti-racist work, or what happens with those of us who are here to learn with as much as humility as possible, is that we actually, there's a sense of like, you are here sharing with us, so there still remains a sort of us versus you, us versus them feeling, right? And when we think about people being called to the work of understanding decolonization, understanding their relationship to the land, I'm going to ask you a question that sounds like it's coming from the head. And this is my last question because we're at 5:54. Who has the right? Who has the right to indigenize or re-indigenize?
Ooh. Well, the same way that I said the indigenous peoples, the original stewards, are the hosts. And who are the guests? When you've been given instruction by indigenous peoples, permissions granted, opportunities, green lights, in what ways are you engaging in it? From as simple as if you were a guest at someone else's house, would you start using their kitchen? Would you take from their fridge? Would you move their furniture in different places? Or wait to find out what your host may request of you, or if you're just there to visit, without assuming, without walking around saying, I'm going to be a good ally or a good friend or a good person. Ground yourself and just listen. And this is not just to Native peoples. Have you listened to the land that you're on? Have you taken this chance and just calmed yourself and listened to all the seasons and watched that environment? It's so very important. And so it's everybody and it's nobody. Because I also recognize my fellow relatives, indigenous peoples. Some of my relatives are still healing from historical trauma, and some are infected with that Western settler mindset. There are natives who capitalize off of things in a not so healthy fashion. And we're human. So it's, how are we grounding ourselves in our environment and in our spaces and aligning our values with the indigenous peoples and histories of the land? How are we in community together, and how are these decisions going forward? And that means sometimes there's restorative justice happening, there's women's circles, men's circles, our circles and gathering spaces for our two-spirit community, contemporary term, two-spirit community members who did not identify as hetero, cis identified beings. So when I say re-indigenization, it's the modality and the mindset, because there's no way we can go back. We can't go back. The world is too impacted. We're not going to go back to the before time, before contact. The land has been devastated. I would love to eat my ancestors' indigenous diet, but some of those animals and beings are not even present anymore. However, our practices, our procedures, our protocols to re-indigenize the way we go about something, from as simple as the way my mom said, do it the right way or do it in a good way. What did she mean? Well, if I'm going to take a life to sustain my own, how am I humbling myself? How am I being accountable, humble, and reciprocal in my decision and my walk? I offer a pinch of tobacco or sometimes my hair or a song to the plants, letting it know that it will be used either for me to ingest or for medicine or for me to teach other people, I recognize I'm impacting that life. Sometimes I'm just only taking leaves. However, I still recognize that I'm not going to take the first sprouts. I'm not going to take the last. Other animals and pollinators need that. Ethical and sustainable harvesting methods is doing things in the right way. And then how am I doing that in that environment? That's re-indigenizing my walk of life, and to consider like that impact. Or like when you think about indigenous peoples where those lionfish are impacting their coral reefs. The indigenous peoples are taking them out. Those are invasive animals, but we're not dredging the reef to get rid of an invasive species. No, indigenous cultures are engaging with indigenous practices to eliminate an invader to help the native species. That's a practice of re-indigenization. It's not exactly the old ways, it's the practices and the practicality of the approach. And so, who? Everybody and nobody. It's how grounded you are. So I'm not gonna give any easy answers because like it's the work that we're doing. The same way when people self-proclaim allyship, the community claims you. Other people will identify you as an ally. If you self-proclaim an ally, or you are a self-proclaiming shaman or a medicine person, why do you have to self-promote yourself like that? That sounds like an ego thing. Most people who are doing good work, yes, it's good to get acknowledged. Yes, it's good to be respected in community and feel valued. But we don't need to advertise so strongly that, look at me, I'm giving food to a homeless person. I'm so great. I'm so wonderful. Ha 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 ha. So, yeah. I started Kanyon Consulting LLC so I can fit into the realm of the working world. And people say, what is your consultation fee? And what is your package fee for this and that and this and the other? I'm like, I'm combating capitalism. We're going to have a debrief and a discovery session, discovery phase, to talk about that. So Kanyon Consulting is my business. My Twitter handle is Kanyon Consulting. My Instagram handle is Kanyon LLC. Instagram is Kanyon LLC. Instagram is Kanyon Consulting. There's somebody else with Kanyon LLC who's a photographer on Instagram. Grr. There's other Canyons out there in the world. My mom said if I was born a girl, it's Canyon with a K, born a boy, Canyon with a C. And I was a youngster walking around Indian Canyon. I'm like, this is my canyon. It's not called Indian Anne Marie. It's not called Indian Richard, after my parents. It's called Indian Canyon. That's where the indigenous peoples hid and fled and sought heaven. And that's my home. But I'm a kid. I'm just a big kid.
Oh my gosh, thank you for sharing your energy with us and the way that you just kind of brought us to where we can find you right at the 6 o'clock minute mark. That's amazing. This has been a blessing to sit with you and think about these things in deeper ways, in languages and in words that we don't know how to find, how to name, how to articulate. I appreciate that so much. I'm wondering if it's okay, Dennis, should I call you in? Would you like to close this up? Did you want to address anything in the chat box? Where are you, Dennis?
I am right here. Oh my gosh, I feel like I'm still marinating and processing. Yeah, I think this is a kind of a good time to close. I guess maybe in the future, if we have future conversations, Kanyon, I'd love to hear, because I've been listening to some of your other conversations with other folks around moving on beyond the binary, or even talking about what does the sacred look like, and how to walk in our walk, right? If we're gonna move towards the vision that you're imagining with, really looking at the opposing of white supremacy and moving towards developing a relationship to the land and the peoples and being relational. I think there's a lot. I don't think we have a lot of time here, but I would like to ask you, maybe in a couple sentences or so, how would you like to kind of close up our space right now? Like, what are a couple of things that you'd like for us folks to be left with, especially during this month, Native American Heritage Month that we need to just be left with to think about.
Honor truth and history, honor the past to shape the future, and be kind and considerate to each other because we are all healing from colonization and we all can take steps for a better future. So being caring, being careful, and asserting truth and history to the best of our ability. Not all of us can be activists, not all of us can be instigators, but we all can do well to be in community together. We're not disposable. So, thank you.
Thank you,
so
Kanyon.
much.
And so much thank yous to all the folks in the chat box, in your spaces, who got to sit with us on a Thursday evening this Native American Heritage Month to sit with Kanyon Sayers-Roods live on Facebook. This is also recorded in case you want the recording. That's so cool. I feel like I'm actually in front of you when you do that. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Kanyon, can you hang out for like 2 minutes? Is that cool? And then everyone else, thank you again for attending and just, continuing our conversations for anti-racist San Jose. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for your time. Thank you, everyone,
Thank
for
you,
joining.
everybody. Definitely. You want to go ahead and take us off of Facebook, Melissa?